Welcome everyone to Therapeutic Astrology Podcast by me, Manna. And I'm here today with Craig Sereptie, which is the artist name of an educator who has a podcast, Left Hand, a channel for immersive philosophy, psychology, and politics. And he also hosts the Acid Horizon podcast. He's doing music, he creates his own tarot cards. And yeah, I feel, Craig, you are a man of many trades, a polymath maybe. So welcome here. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you having me on to discuss today.
Yeah. Am I right about is it called Jack of Many Trades? Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's basically how we say it here. Jack of all trades, sure.
All
I
trades.
yeah, I think actually that's probably a better way to put it. A jack of many modest trades, but certainly not of all of them.
Sure. Yeah. So we we definitely have a match on that interdisciplinary field. Even
Hmm.
just from merging therapy and astrology, but I merge many other mystical pieces. So we share that, and so I thought maybe just to ask you a bunch of questions, and maybe not until in the end, maybe we can tie it together. But will that be okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So my first question is left hand philosophy.
Mm, sure.
I really want to hear how you say what that is.
Mm. Yes. So let's talk first, perhaps, about the Acid Horizon podcast, because the concept for left hand, I think, is a sibling concept, or it's a place to deepen a certain trend, tendency, or discussion that we have on the Acid Horizon podcast. I know that once we logged on here today, one of your first questions was what is Acid Horizon? What does that mean? And so, just a brief introduction to the podcast and how it began at the beginning of the pandemic in the early months of 2020. Many of us were basically made to stay at home or couldn't go to our ordinary jobs. And I had the good fortune, actually, of retaining my salary while I was sitting at home, twiddling my thumbs, thinking about what to do. Not that I didn't have anything to do, but it allowed me an opportunity to consider what it might be like to channel my interest in philosophy into doing a few episodes of a podcast while we were on a
Ah,
break. And so the philosophy that I was interested in after coming out of my master's program at Cal State LA was that of the work of Deleuze and Guattari, Foucault, Jean Baudrillard, largely French thinkers that we associate with the continental tradition, but not only them, some of their more modern counterparts, namely the work of British author and writer Mark Fisher. And he has this concept in his essays called acid communism. And it was something that really piqued my interest the first time I had come across it. I was always politically on the left, and I would say a radical of sorts, but not immune to criticizing or, accepting the fact that attempts to transform the world and make it more free have failed, and many of those tendencies have come to pass. And so I was interested in interrogating the idea of what were the reasons for that? What was left behind? What was not exploited in the good sense of the term? Like what did we miss in our effort to radicalize or transform the world? And one of the things that Mark Fisher points out is that there, I mean, more broadly in his work, and like many of these thinkers that I work with, is that we are not libidinally invested in the kind of change that would allow us to extricate ourselves from a world where we could be free, right? And so, in the case of Mark Fisher in particular, he has a concept called acid communism. And just to give you a brief overview of what that means, the notion of acid communism is indulging the idea that there, for example, at the turn of the decade from the 1960s to the 1970s, there was a countercultural movement across the globe, particularly in the United States and Britain. But And often, sometimes this was at odds with radical far left movements, but sometimes there were overlapping interests here. But the idea was is that we could find a portal outside of the current capitalist conjecture, a world where everything is commodified, a world where everything becomes essentially reduced to a sale or utilitarian value, and that we could, through some means of transcendence, find another world, whether that was psychedelic drugs, communes, different kinds of social experiments, or what have you. And one of the things that Mark Fisher tries to do in this unfinished essay is explore the possibility of elevating this project or renewing this project some sense in the present. That was just one among many ideas that I was interested in. And at the time that I created that podcast, that was certainly on my mind. And so I decided to take the acid from acid communism and call it acid horizon. And so essentially what would that mean is where is the horizon that we can go beyond, and to see the prospect or possibilities for a better future. And so Left Hand was another project that evolved out of that for many reasons. One of my interests, I would say somewhat outside or adjacent to philosophy itself, has been in the past, well, I could say archetypal psychology, but just dreaming in general. So I've had a very rich dream life throughout my whole life. Yeah, maybe when I was younger, I mean, it was quite strong to the extent that maybe I didn't realize how intense my dreams were when I was younger. I was not impelled to talk to my family about it. It was a very private sort of experience. And then at various instances, while I was growing up or in my teenage or adult life, I would have moments where dreams came back with great force for a short period of time, or you'd have the eventual, as Carl Jung might say, big dream. There was a moment in my life, too, where I lived overseas. I lived in Japan, and I was stricken with a series of night terrors. And it was so bad that it prompted me to do something about it. And I really had no resources, or well, the resources that one might have in their home country might be more forthcoming or might just be in arm's reach. But there, I was reduced to going on eBay and Amazon to find books, to sort of self-diagnose or analyze my situation. But I also had the good fortune of meeting a therapist who was the son of, I guess you would say, the Japanese counterpart to Carl Jung. And this gentleman was one of, I guess you would say, the most prominent
Wow.
dream theorists and therapists in that time. And he may still be alive, in fact. So at that time, I immersed myself in the work, I mean, of Carl Jung, but particularly the American therapist, archetypal therapist, James Hillman. And one of the things that attracted me to Hillman's work, more so than, let's say, Carl Jung's work, was his interest in the connection between the imaginal realm and politics and the world as we are experiencing it now, particularly with relation to climate change. I mean, Hillman's work comes out of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Climate change and other social ills that we had been experiencing. But I would say broadly construed, he talks about our alienation from the world of the imagination, from the world of images, in a way that also cuts us off from what we call nature, the animal kingdom, for example, and a whole host of other things that are non-human. And that line of thinking really stayed with me for a while. And so I would say that I had two trends in my thinking that developed over the years that ensued those experiences. The first being, I would say, a brutally political trend, one that is strongly materialist, right? I would say, even what's the word? Jealously materialist, in a sense. The other side of me was one that was a bit more inward, more committed to an idea that at some level, our individual and collective psychic reality intensely brought to bear on the way that not only that we experience the world, but also the conditions under which our social reality is reproduced. And so if we want to split acid horizon and left hand into, I
Mm.
guess you would say, a dyad of rival concepts, which they are not, we could say that roughly a lot of the big political bucket, the brutally political bucket, where we might talk about issues of the day in very direct terms, we might find on acid horizon alongside philosophy of the materialist variety. But I also, like I said, I wanted to create a space where we could talk about the ways in which things like psyche, esoteric research, the numinous, understandings of our noumenal reality, and the way that we interact with imagination intersect with philosophy and politics, and that's what Left Hand is.
Oh, oh man, Rick. I'm still breathing over here, but it's wow. You just took me on quite a journey, and I can't help to think about this in terms of your sun and your moon. And we're not doing the
Mm.
astrology until the end, but I cannot help. I cannot help to think about it already because, well, I guess I'm only actually listening to your moon very consciously because the politics
Mm.
is not really. But you have politics as well in left hand.
Mm.
You know, it kind of dribbles in there. But so your sun and moon is just for the information to the listeners is that you have your sun, it's in Gemini. That's also the many traits, and it's in the 11th house of, for example,
Mm.
politics. And then the
Mm.
moon is the dreamy part in Pisces, and it's such a wonderful pair. They're in an exact square to each other, and yeah, and it's very private because it's in the 8th house. So
Mm.
it's so I'm really feeling what you're talking about. Uh, but okay, just for understanding. So if we go back to the acid and that community, where does acid come in? I just don't understand the word in this
Oh,
context.
sure. I think the word acid actually comes from LSD.
Okay.
So I mean, in this case, it doesn't mean that. It probably more directly refers to psychedelia more broadly, the psychedelic experiment, psychedelic reality. And then in Acid Horizon, of course, I'm not reducing it to the use of drugs or, psychoactive drugs or what have you. I want to think of acid in terms of the things that transform not only consciousness, but also our libidinal reality, which means essentially the makeup of our collective desire. How can we understand that? And in understanding it, what are the conditions by which we can transform it?
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're talking about something outside of materialism.
Uh, well, I have to say, here's something that I want to clear up about maybe what I believe right away. I would say if I were, if you were to put a gun to my head and ask me, am I a materialist or an idealist, which is a common distinction in the world of philosophy, I would have to err on the side of materialism.
Okay.
But it would introduce me to a number of problems that I think are not solved by many materialist philosophies, or at least need an addendum of some kind. I would call myself an immanentist. So what that means is I believe that our world, which includes the cosmos more broadly, is an immanent one that needs to make no appeal to a sort of transcendent authority. So all of the gods are with us. They are in our lives. They are expressed through our beliefs, our actions, and what have you. And maybe that's a way to put it that would resonate most closely with your listeners. But that said, as a materialist, one thing that I also believe is we need to make an account of the immaterial reality. How is it, for example, that a particular set of relations, let's call them social relations, our thinking, our beliefs, our imagination, time itself, how do all of those things come to interact in a way such that they produce new ways of thinking about the world, a new reality every so often? How is it that new events happen that change everything? And I would say in my broader system of beliefs, that requires us to think about how matter requires something that is non-material, the construction of sense, what maybe the thinker Henri Corbin has this concept of the mundus imaginalis, that somewhere within our shared reality, there is a grand contest of imagination, of images that interact with one another, worldviews, and so forth. And these are not reducible to beliefs necessarily. This is almost prior to our most discrete sense of beliefs. And what I'm talking about here is, you know, when I say, for example, that we're in this cosmic imaginal soup, each one of us, to extend that metaphor, is swimming in a different set of flavors and ingredients, but it's all intermingled with the rest of it. And so we live within a world, a milieu, and a context where all of those things are interacting in a sort of an arena of contest, I would say. Um, and so, I mean, maybe there's a kind of military metaphor there in a sense, or a combative metaphor, but it's also a bit of a dance sometimes too. And I would say, given the world that we live in now, um, you know, like let's think about it in terms of gods, Greek gods. You know, we live in a world of war. The god Ares right now
Yeah.
is 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 kind of holding the scepter high, if we want to put it that way. And the forces that stand to contest, you know, this god and his assemblage of forces has a very different imaginal character than, let's say, how we imagine uh, like the war god, if you will. I think my understanding of that, you know, once again is not reducible to Greek myth or an understanding of myth, but that is kind of one of the lenses that I will look through from time to time in order to, you know, make a clear understanding of things.
Yeah. Or maybe sometimes less clear, but
Mm.
deeper and wider,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
that happens too. Yes.
Because as I'm speaking with you, I don't feel like, oh, okay, like this is one concrete answer. I feel like more of a broadening of perspective, and I feel something that's be a little bit of my understanding, but I kind of like
Mm,
that because it
mm,
stimulates me to learn more. So, okay, but I'm gonna go forth with my question, so we have a little bit of different things to talk about. Um,
sure.
Okay, so I have written a question down here because it's about your last episode on the Left Hand podcast, and it's
Yes.
actually one of your own questions to your guest
Okay.
that stood out to me, and that was about the attention economy. And I thought
Oh, yes.
that's brilliant to talk to a Gemini and I about because
Mm,
podcasting is part of that. And for myself, I want to say that I feel like I'm part of this epoch in time with
mm,
so much information that both enabled me and created me as an interviewer because I would not be able to do that with my social background if not for self-publishing. And yet it also destroys me. It destroys me because
mm.
everyone is flooded with information, and I'm like
Yes.
running to get the word out and to get myself out there. And so it's like, it's the rise and the fall, it's the creation and the destruction in a way. um
Hmm.
because it takes a while to get a few who's committed. Like, you can listen maybe to one episode that gets a lot of listeners, but then the people who stay around, that takes a lot. Anyway,
Yeah.
my question is around the attention economy, and you said something around provocation versus noise. Again, I'm not sure I
Mm-hmm.
completely got that, but just in overall terms, what is your view on the current situation of attention economy that you are part of that?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the reasons that I brought that question into the discussion is because, like you, it is something that I'm quietly plagued by right? A question of whether or not I am bringing more noise into a
Yeah.
world where I'd kind of like to see less noise.
Yes.
So, so I will say that once we acknowledge that there's an ethical dimension to that, at some level, it's incumbent upon us to make a change, evaluate, or just assess our output in some way. So, in the case of what we do, maybe in comparison to, I mean, I have a lot of friends who actually do podcasts that do very similar podcasts to us, and I love their work. Then I would say that there are other kinds of media, maybe podcasts or just maybe reels that we see online and posts that we see on Twitter or things that we see on Substack that we might imagine them being along a continuum, like as being more serious, more overladen with value, richer discussions versus things that intend to provoke, right? That intend to just grab attention for the sake of having attention. And anybody who has a YouTube channel knows that whether you're putting a rich discussion out there or one that's rather shallow, as long as it gets the likes, that's going to make the money. Right. And so some people are in it primarily for that. Now, so there is a bit of a balance, I think, that one needs to maintain in order to make one's enterprise of doing something like a podcast to remain viable. Because in my case, I essentially, I ultimately quit my day job to do what I'm doing. And so now I have different plates spinning in this world. And so that makes doing something like a podcast a bit more precarious. And it exposes you more coldly in a more raw way to the logic of the attention economy. And so the temptation to put something out there that merely provokes just so that it gets views is quite high. And if your sense of integrity entails that, for example, you make something of a particular quality, or you focus on a variety of topics, or you shift the discussion or the focus at some point on something timely at the expense of perhaps losing listeners or putting out an opinion that might unsettle or upset somebody, those are questions that then come into view or and become important to you, so that you're able to maintain your audience. I would like to think that, amongst Acid Horizon and Left Hand listeners, I think many of our listeners have become, friends or acquaintances at some level because we've interacted in a Discord server. And so they know my views, my values, and are maybe even forgiving of some of my foibles and maybe areas where our views or opinions don't line up exactly. But that said, I've also had the good fortune of wagering on putting out rich discussions on topics that matter to people, whether they're grad students, retirees, students in high school who are getting into philosophy for the first time, and really just putting something out there that I would want for myself. And maybe we could probably do the rest of the episode on this if you wanted to. But maybe one thing that I'll say is that, and who knows, this might line up with my chart. When I was younger, like junior high school age, I was pretty rambunctious. I like to be the class clown. I like to be the center of attention. I'd also like to think that over time, that tendency was refined through education or what have you, so that these days I do get my fair share of attention from other people. But now, as I'm approaching almost 50 years old, I have to say that silence is a kind of wealth these days. And
Wow.
so
Yeah.
I, I mean, from time to time, I revisit some of these old habits and tendencies and indulge the occasional provocation online on Twitter, something like that. But I think something that's more nourishing to me is creating a space where, I can spend a couple hours a day, not online, not immersed in the noise, as it were, but also too when I come back to either record an episode or develop something for our platform, I'm doing so in a way that doesn't feed into the cacophony.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good answer. I don't mind spending a little bit more time with it. Because I'm really glad for what you said just after I asked you. You were like, yeah, the dilemma between just joining in with the noise and what I call the acceleration.
Mm,
That's
hmm.
not my term, but I
Yeah,
feel it's a very suiting term, the accelerated society, and versus doing something like you're also sharing, like this is from my heart, this is what I would have wanted, you know, if
yeah,
if only I had found that myself. So, but then because there's just so much information right now, it can feel like we're drowning. Do you get that sense? Can you follow me on that kind of, it both creates you, but it can also destroy you, that there is so much of it.
sure. I mean, I'm looking out my window right now into literally miles of forest land. So I live on a mountain in the middle of the woods. And so here in this 12 by 16 office space in which I do my thing, as soon as I go out the door, all of that evaporates immediately. So I would say that I have the good benefit of having access to immediate balance.
Oh, I love that. I feel it just as you say it. I'm like, oh, that's really good. That is really good. Yeah, and I'm with you on the silence, that is an abundant thing. And you said it may align with your chart. I mean, there's no way that it does not align with your chart. Surely, surely. But we can circle back to that. Craig, I want to be sure that I really got to understand what left hand philosophy is, because after you explained, I went back to acid, but I didn't go back to left hand. And so
Hmm.
but because what you call left hand philosophy is also like a sort of esoteric tradition, right?
Sure. Yeah, so there's an ironic usage there, and
Okay.
I would say it's multi-layered. So,
Right.
I mean, certainly we have left in terms of left-wing politics,
Yeah.
but also left hand in terms of the esoteric left-hand path.
Mm.
Um, and I would say too that the philosophers that I've introduced on the podcast, namely somebody like George Bataille, I would say in the left-wing tradition are part of a kind of left-wing path of their own. They're more anarchistic, but also philosophically speaking, they're sort of apostates of the dominant tradition, I would say, of Hegelian dialectics. If you're familiar with the philosophy of G.W.F. Hegel, and so Bataille himself too was concerned himself at one time. He was one of the first notable theorists of anti-fascism in the 20th century. And that being the case, one would think that he would do everything in his power. Like if I were to introduce somebody to you as like, this person here is an anti-fascist theorist, one might think, oh, this person is against everything that fascism holds to be true or valuable. But in Bataille's case, one of the things that he was interested in is finding out what was it about the kind of collective thinking that drew people to their own self-subjugation, whether that be through a dictator, an ideology, or whatever else. And he wanted to know how, what was it about their worldview, their sense of mythology, their imagination in the broadest possible sense that made them susceptible to this. But yet at the same time, he wanted to know how those imaginal components, if we want to call them that, also created a great sense of exuberance and a kind of ecstatic feeling because the world in which we live, where, we have fascist, arguably far-right governments, the new right, whatever you want to call it, wherever you live in Europe and certainly the United States, somebody like Bataille would want to understand, how is it the case that we get behind these strong men and lift them up at the expense of cutting ourselves off from our own power? And so he went to Italy at one time in particular, and he was a librarian. So he ensconced himself in a library and studied many famous works of mythology, the Golden Bow, those kinds of books, and what have you, in an effort to see, how it was the fascist imaginary and I guess you would say the general reactionary tendency, the general tendency of people to engender a kind of reactive desire and not espouse a desire or espouse values that would allow them to live their lives in a more autonomous way. And so I would say part of the left-hand path of philosophy, in the case of Bataille, for example, also involves criticizing how it was, for example, that the opponents of fascism, the ostensible opponents of fascism, like the Soviet Union, namely Stalin's Russia, how was it that they also engendered much of the same rationality and logic, not only of fascists, but of modern day utilitarian capitalism? And one of the things that Bataille in particular, as being a kind of avatar of the Left Hand podcast, one of the reasons that he's important is he criticizes that aspect of life where we tend to reduce ourselves to a utilitarian vehicle, a mere tool, that our existence just becomes the reproduction of our lives, of our jobs, of this reality, and the very meager ways in which we consume and feel ecstasy are reduced to things that we purchase, whether it's in a store or online or what have you. And one of the things about, for example, the world of my dreams, the world of psyche, there's a kind of ecstasy and joy there that stands apart from, the paltry desires of the market.
Mm.
And I think for somebody like Bataille, and maybe I'll just say myself at this point, is that I'm interested in creating a world that's devoid of, that diminishes those sorts of mediations so that, for example, we can do things like have in-person get-togethers and dinners and so forth in a time where we feel so alienated from one another, or have reading groups where we, spend hours almost luxuriating over a particular text, but
Wow.
doing so in a way that's communal and getting to know people in a way that's outside of the mediations of an online space. And also, because I live in the forests and the mountains of Pennsylvania, you know, we live in a world that tends not to value the kind of long, luxurious walk through the woods in, sometimes absolute silence. But really, what happens when you go into the space of what we ordinarily call nature? You hear the crunch of the leaves, you hear the chittering of mice and birds and everything else. And going into that space, creating space for those kinds of experiences in a world where, the market, urbanization and everything else tends to foreclose those possibilities more and more. And so I would say that part of my sort of left-hand philosophy in some is criticizing that tendency in our political, social, and cultural movements that constantly makes recourse to things like utilitarian value, the measure of one's self-worth against a certain social standard. And how is it that we can be in a world of beauty, right? How can we intervene on that tendency? How can we rupture that continuity that always brings us back to just another online purchase or something like that? And granted, I mean, I'm guilty of the same things here that I'm implying that all of us are guilty of. But and then of course, as we mentioned, as a podcaster, it's a challenge because I'm firmly within that mode of exchange.
Yeah, you're firmly in that mode of exchange of what do you mean?
Like the mode of exchange with the attention economy and being online, promotion, marketing, advertising. I remember when I was in my undergrad in college. Now, one thing that that my wife certainly knows about me, and some other folks know about me as well, is that I have a real knack for marketing and advertising, right?
Yes, him and I.
And
Right.
and in fact, when I was younger, I worked at a bank, and they sent me away for like 2 to 3 weeks to go to this marketing school. Where I learned like and while I was like 18 years old. So it was a formative experience of mine educationally. But I always kind of had that sort of like marketing knack, like I said. But then I was in a program at my university, and I was studying. I was in a class on Buddhism, if I remember correctly, and the professor said, if you want to achieve enlightenment, probably according to a certain Buddhist view, probably one of the worst possible professions. Actually, let me correct that. What he in fact said was, if you want to stop the wheel of samsara in Buddhism, one way not to do it is to become something like an advertiser or an advertising agent, right? Meaning that's the kind of person who just creates desire in the world and
Right.
keeps us
Okay.
trapped, right? So that got stuck in my craw at some point, and like it just stuck with me. And so I think I developed a kind of resentment of my own tendency. But as somebody who does podcasting and works, I guess you would say in media, it's an essential attribute to have if you want any sort of longevity or foothold in that world so that you can do it regularly or in a full-time capacity.
But I like that you have elements in you and to you that makes you really ethical about it and really reflected about it.
Mm.
Oh, that was a good answer. Oh man. And the overlap between, because I've read that I've just recently started a Danish solo podcast on mysticism where I read different books,
Mm.
and so I follow upon that concept that occultism and that there's an overlap with politics, left
Mm.
politics. I guess in creating a better world. I guess in
Mm.
um, yeah, some of what you were just saying there, like and going against. I really like that. I think that was what I was trying to say earlier around beyond materialism. That's so dualistic. Like, what does that even
Mm.
mean? That's very constructed to put it like that. But really going beyond utilitarian values, you called it. That's the
Yes.
thing, and that's the thing where when you talk about it, you're a little bit like, oh, I'm guilty of that too, and I think that's really what we also should talk about. That it's inside of us, it's in our
Hmm.
in our minds, and that's why when I want to walk in the forest, it's gonna pop up in my head. Whereas I'm like, maybe I should, do something more productive. That's because
Mm.
it's inside of me now. It's not just
Yeah.
something that I read about or I relate to. It's really inside my own mind.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, going back to the work of Mark Fisher, who is, coined the term acid communism, he has an essay, actually it's his doctoral dissertation that is called it's called Flatline Constructs, but he talks about something called Gothic materialism. And maybe the sort of like one or two sentence way to understand it in terms of what we're talking about is there is now a very strongly blurred line between what we understand as our organic selves and our digital selves, to the point that when you walk into the woods, it's almost as if the buttons are still pushing you, right?
Mm,
The likes are being clicked inside of you. That impulse to tweet or create or edit or promote or anything else
mm.
exists inside you as a kind of residue that, it almost take like days, weeks, or months to,
To detox,
have it.
detox that.
Yeah, yeah, to detox it. And that's something that I've thought about, is like, I mean, the whole concept of digital detox these days is, sounds very appealing, but it's also one of those things that's a luxury for people in the middle class and above. If I had more time, space, resources, time really, it would be really interesting to create, a firmly democratic, inclusive reality or a place rather where people could convene and really be offline and do things. I mean, surely these kinds of businesses exist, but I think it's something that we just need more generally for the public, especially workers and people who have less resources than others.
Yeah. Oh, I really,
Mm,
I'm actually pretty moved by what you're saying because I'm
mm,
relating it to your chat in my mind. I'm
mm.
really, yeah, it's like really soulful.
mm.
I have one more question, and then we're gonna talk about your astrology. But
Oh, okay.
then for real, we're gonna talk about it.
Mhm.
Um, so I wanna talk to you about your tarot cards.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
so I just it's like an open question. You can share whatever you want about it.
Mm,
But my question is, do you also relate it to like the year that we are in?
mm.
Do you have like there's a certain card or number for this year?
Oh, do you mean amongst the cards that I've created, like a particular card in the deck?
Yes.
Oh, I've never thought about it in those
Okay. Yeah.
terms.
So that's
No.
it's so different.
Yeah.
It's so different,
Yeah.
right? I guess I don't know if that's only in capitalistic tarot or I mean it's such a blend of
Mm,
traditions in tarot cards. So what is
sure.
like what is a through line for you? How would you use it if you wanted to know like what should I do on this time? How would you go about that? Or maybe just drawing a
Ah,
card, of course, but
okay. Well, maybe I should say a few words first about the kinds of decks that I created.
yeah,
I've for a long time just had uh, I guess you'd say a casual interest in tarot. And then at one point, the opportunity came to me where I was able to create a deck, and a publisher was going to put it out. And that particular opportunity allowed me to learn the tarot in full. Because if you're making a deck, well, you better know the tarot to some extent,
yeah,
unless you're making it up, which I mean, certainly people do. That said, amongst the decks that I've created, I created a deck which is called the Philosopher's Tarot. More recently, I created a deck about the figure George Bataille, who we talked about. So basically, took a philosopher and transformed his work, his concepts, and his oeuvre, as they would say, into a deck, essentially. And it was very successful. And one of the ways that we tried to honor the values that Bataille upheld was we didn't want to make it this infinite market economy. So we just did a very limited run, and only a few people got them. And that was it. It would just terminate so that it just wasn't another commodity on the shelf. Then, alongside that, I made a deck that I would say is a little bit closer to the heart. And
but can
this
I
was,
ask, was it
sure, yeah.
George Bataille tarot cards? Was it then him depicted on every card and then on this kind of evolutionary journey?
So basically, it mapped onto the traditional Rider-Waite deck, and
Yeah,
then we just made slight tweaks to the suits and everything. But what we did was for the major arcana, I took the themes from the major arcana and then converted them. I say there's three of us involved with the project. We took those cards and then we converted the concepts to, or I would say we converted the figures in the major arcana to concepts in Bataille's work. And so that's what we did with that aspect of the deck. And then for the minor arcana, basically did the same thing, but we tried to do it in a way that kept the oracular integrity of the Rider-Waite tarot. So the deck could be used as that,
yeah,
but it could also be used as a way to learn about the concepts.
yeah,
But then we also created our own bespoke spreads for the deck too. And so that was it was a big job to say the least. It was
yeah.
very fun project.
It
Um,
must have been because again, your mind is fusing themes, with these various sources that you are streaming from, that your mind
right.
is like sending out from. So you're really weaving that into a tarot deck. That's amazing. Okay, but you were gonna say
Yeah.
some more after that.
Yeah. The other deck that I created is called Vintagia. And this was a deck that it's essentially an I Ching deck. And when I was in university as an undergrad, I had multiple independent studies on the I Ching, or the Chinese Book of Changes. And in the context of that course, I learned about the history and the usages of the deck and the philosophy of the deck as well, particularly as it connected to many Taoist thinkers. But also in this university setting, my mentor and I were actually using the deck for divination. And at the time, I would say that, once again, I'm sort of on this materialist track, but in this very special setting, indulging in this mystical practice of sorts,
Oh,
and using it as a way to guide, uh, I would say guide my life, but really to create a lens of understanding about who I was at that time. So it was a way to sort of self-actualize in that environment. And
yeah.
I'll say, so like I said, I invested multiple semesters in this particular research project, and one of the cards. So for anybody who's interested,
Yeah.
one my teacher had asked me at the time to cast for a hexagram that essentially would be the hexagram that is definitive of me and my life path. And the hexagram that
Wow.
was drawn was hexagram 17, which is sui, or the following, or following, I think they just say. And so this particular hexagram has to do with the way that it sort of panned out for me is that there's a kind of leadership in this world that only works well if the leader themselves is following something.
Yeah.
And the kind of following here might be, for example, a particular philosopher, and then, spending time with them, learning about their work, internalizing their ideas and concepts, and then maybe moving on and finding mentors, sages who would then, inform my own growth. And so I would say, as a philosopher and as a wisdom seeker of sorts, that has been a theme that's been characteristic of my life.
Yeah.
And so that is a commitment and a memory that I held quietly for decades. And
Um,
then one day, amidst doing these projects, I had a very violent shower thought, I guess you would say, where it suddenly came to me that I should do this deck called Vintagia. And the concept of the deck would be a retro themed I Ching deck where I would take retro themed photography and I would use the deck not only to do I Ching castings, but I would also use it as a way to stoke creativity and house little writing and artistic and musical prompts because I do music and I do some writing from time to time, and so I created prompts that correspond with all of the hexagrams of the I Ching, and I put it together fairly quickly. And I had made a friend locally who was also interested in the I Ching, and it was actually two friends, and they sort of spurred me into completing this deck rather quickly. I printed that deck alongside the George Bataille deck last year, and I sold out of all of them. So your
yeah.
listeners are going to be hearing this and thinking, I want to get my hands on them. But I think what I'll probably have to do, well, I have another deck in the works right now. That's
Cool.
that's the big secret for this year.
Oh,
But what I'll probably do is when I print that particular deck, I will do a reprint of Vintagia, and hopefully that will be out sometime again in the summer.
yeah.
But also, there are some institutions and groups that want me to do workshops with this particular deck that I might do sometime later in the year as well. So, it's something that I need to stay on top of. I need to keep up my familiarity with the I Ching and keep
Yeah.
practicing with it. Yeah.
That's one thing I don't. There's many things I don't know, but it's one of the mystical paths that I've not even looked at yet. The I Ching,
Mm,
not other than
yeah.
on an app.
Right, exactly, exactly.
You
And
can.
it and Confucius himself said, and these days I'm very far away from Asian philosophy, unlike my younger days, but he said that if he had the chance to repeat 10 lifetimes. I might be getting this quote wrong. Somebody can correct me, but if Confucius had 10 lifetimes, he would use the additional 9 or 10 lifetimes just to study the I Ching because he felt it was that deep.
Oh man. But I think actually you could say that about each probably discipline.
Sure.
But it's just
Yeah.
that some of us, some of us need, need those various sources actually,
Sure.
and the putting it more together. Okay, so let's talk about your astrology. First of all,
Okay.
I wanna know, what do you know? Are you into astrology? What do you know about your own chart? Where are you with it?
I don't, I would say of all of this stuff, astrology is probably the thing that I know least about.
Okay.
But I will say that I might have generated a chart online at some point. I can't recall. I know that I'm a Gemini, and sometimes that's a problem on the dating scene. I'm married now, so thankfully that's not an issue anymore. But
Okay.
I'm coming to you. And I have to say, I would say of all of these traditions, and just cards on the table, no pun
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah.
There's a way in which I would say I'm most skeptical of astrology, probably because I don't know astrology, first of
Well,
all, and yeah, so maybe
yeah.
maybe
Don't.
you can convince me.
I'm not even gonna try. That would
But I
be
am
all
interested to
difficult.
hear. I will say this. I am interested to hear, not because I'm looking to confirm my own biases, but I really like the stories that are told too, the way that it gets my imagination and thinking going. So I'm really interested to hear what's in the chart.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Just so definitely what stood out to me at first is that I've been talking about that sun and moon square because it is
Okay.
exact, and when something is exact, because we have up to 10 degrees, where it's still in this or that aspect, but when something is so close, it's like, yes. I don't know, as an
Mm,
astrologer, I just feel it in my bones. It's like, this is so important, and it's a closing square, so it's definitely about dispersing knowledge. And what kind of knowledge, and the reason why I say knowledge is because of the Gemini, but what kind of knowledge? Well, then that is the fusion of that kind of quite detached perspective that you can have
mm,
as an air sign,
mm,
together with, well, some kind of, like, you would identify with a lot of things emotionally, because
mm,
of the Pisces moon. So in a way, it's detached, and it's a wide range, but it's like, but your soul is in there, and forgive me for
mm.
using the word soul, and it
No,
has
it's good. Yeah.
different meanings, but just like that kind of soulful, heartful place of wanting to actually relate to everything in a way, because
Mm,
the Pisces is about wholeness. So see, I've written something here. Yeah, like processing from diverse sources. I think that's a good one.
mm,
You're processing from diverse sources. So, diverse sources, that's a Gemini, because you have so much interest in a lot of things, and you can easily communicate that. And then the processing, that's the moon. That's what you're talking about with the dreams, and
mm,
also the ideals that I'm hearing you talk about. Not ideals in that it's not reachable, but that, like, the beauty you're talking about in getting together with people, and
mm,
going, I guess, back to nature. So yeah, and also about getting answers. Um,
mm.
so this is a big question. I'm gonna make it short, but I want to
Sure.
say something about the whole truth seeking process, and
Hmm.
grasping for truth, because you have your sun conjunct Jupiter, and you have a big ninth house. I'm just saying that for
Mm,
reference, but that is really about, yeah, needing a next horizon.
mm,
you know needing for there to be more. You realize that there is more, and again, with the Gemini, you're doing a great job of communicating it. But if you were to never move yourself, that would be awful. You really need to have that multiple sources of input, for yourself, and And okay, one more thing I thought about is that you do actually have a quite a lot in Taurus, and you're talking about being a materialist, and you also, yeah, I'm just thinking you're bringing actually something quite spiritual into the tangible with tarot cards, right?
Mm.
That's a Taurian thing to do that, to wanting to, you know, let show it to me, let me feel
Mm.
it, right, with my
Mm.
body. And oh, Craig, I could keep talking. I get too excited. I get too excited. So yeah, just anything. What do you reflect when you hear this? Is there anything that catches on your attention in any way?
Yeah, I don't know how strongly related this is to what you just said, but one of the things that came up for me right now was thinking about the purpose. Maybe it was you talking about being truth seeking,
Yeah.
because a lot of the philosophy that I'm interested in is often interrogating the concept of truth itself, turning it on its head, maybe even devaluing the notion of truth and
Right.
uplifting the value of life over truth, where truth can be used in a way to sort of constrain life, living, transformation. It makes me think, there is a kind of error that I have committed, perhaps, in becoming a philosopher, which is the impulse that has driven me to thought is one that I don't think is contained within the realm of arguments, propositions, logic, let's say. In fact, and this is to also say that there are some philosophers who acknowledge this and are on my side in this regard. There's one particular philosopher I'm thinking of right now who's not very well known. His name is Lev Shestov. But one of the ideas of Shestov, he's not well known in the United States anyway. But Shestov said that philosophy is partly about escaping the strictures of logicality, which in simple terms means, there's a way in which philosophy is used to give ourselves a sort of concrete understanding of life. But one of the reasons that I got into philosophy was to pursue or deepen a kind of mystery that's not easily articulated or put into words.
Yeah.
And I would say stands apart in some way from, let's say, the intensity of my dream life, for example. Like last night, I had an incredible dream. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's almost like swimming in a cold lake on a summer day. It was so refreshing.
Ah,
And there's a way in which philosophy, I don't think, is adequate to the task of,
yeah.
capturing the feelings or the intensity of that experience and bringing it back into the day world. And maybe that's a good thing too.
No,
But
it's lovely. Yeah, it's not.
yeah.
Yeah, so you have your logical mind and you have all of these
Mhm.
disciplines and this philosophy, and yet you're feeling with your moon in Pisces, but there's more, and it's not even maybe not even possible really to say in these
Mm,
terms, in these
mm,
languages that we have available. That's how I'm taking
mm,
what you're saying. Like, and
mm.
also
Absolutely. Yeah.
I remember, like, because of your last episode that I mentioned earlier, where you were talking with Emma about why would you go into philosophy. I really like that part because
Yeah.
actually, because you are looking for meaning. So probably because you had a crisis of meaning at some point, right? A breakdown,
Mm,
and then you're looking for something. So that's also, so you're saying, yeah, maybe there was an error to my philosophy, but that's a
mm.
place to go, right? When you need
Right. Right.
to find
Sure.
meaning.
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm being somewhat facetious in
I get
saying
that.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're,
Yeah.
in a way, you're
Uh,
exploring the edges of it, right? You're going to the
yeah.
boundaries and then looking over that. I sense that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the biggest takeaway for me.
Mm.
I guess if I had a question then,
Yeah.
I'd be curious. And maybe you've already said some of this already, but like what's a concrete way to understand this interpretation of who I am and make it useful or more interesting or more woven into the fabric of my life?
Mm. Huh. I believe it already is. That's the
Mm,
first answer. Um, And I believe that it is in what you're saying, and that's, I understand that can sometimes be annoying for people, that
Mhm.
the astrologer is just kind of saying back what you already said. It's kind of just,
Mm, mhm,
confirming that. But it is because it's coming out in what you're already dealing with. And for example, that community, I do think that's a big part of it, and how to make that into something natural and organic and real. And your integrity is also, it's huge.
mm.
It's a huge thing for you
Well,
because
I,
yeah.
I, I want to know the bad stuff too. Where are the risks? Please tell me. I'm committed to a certain level of honesty about myself. So
Okay, good,
let
good,
me have it.
good
Yeah.
challenge. Well, okay, so you're asking about what are like the traps, with my
Traps is a good word.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
I
my
like traps.
personality, what can my personality, get me entangled with? Well, you could take too much acid. you know?
I'll say no comment, but also yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could drown yourself in that otherworldly ideal that you're so longing for.
Mm,
So that
mm,
is
mhm,
definitely a challenge. And when you have days where you do go into some kind of flow, however you do it, then people around you can feel neglected. Uh,
mm,
But
mm, mhm,
but really what it is some kind of self-neglect, because what is most valuable to you is in a way not yourself. And so
mm,
it's a lot to deal with in this incarnation where we kind of have to take care of ourselves. uh, I mean, and you are, I mean, you
mm,
have all of that Taurus to taking care of, the physical, the basics, but you
mm.
just have so much in your chart that's related to idealism, if you could call it that,
Yeah.
reaching
Mm,
beyond. And so
mm.
that can make you like leave sometimes. um
Well, that's a common complaint of my wife.
okay.
So yeah, it's out there. It's out there. Well, and maybe even my family too. I was certainly, I guess you'd say the black sheep of the family. But when I was younger, my mom was just completely astonished, surprised, or by the fact that I could go and just play in the yard by myself for like 3 to 4 hours, just doing nothing, like running around, sticks in the air, imaginary friends. And that's, there's some version of that still active today.
Yeah, of course you still have
Yeah.
that, some version of
Yeah.
that, but that's, I think it's a good thing. But you asked me
Yeah.
about, the shadow side of it, but I think it's a very
Yeah.
beautiful thing as well, because
Well,
that's what, it opens the spiritual realm for you.
I think there's another version of that that's alive in me. And if you've encountered any of my discussion or right, I think maybe even I talked about it a little bit in the conversation with Emma was, in my dreams, I've had kind of recurring dream figures throughout my life. One who's a woman. If you were to be a Jungian, for example, this might be what they call the anima figure. This could be the figure of the soul itself. But I've had other people look at these dreams and say different things about them. But a sort of overlapping or interesting resonance shared by many people who've heard these dreams is that this woman figure that I see, she's a kind of ineffable woman,
Mm.
someone whom I can't have, I cannot grasp her, she cannot be my bride, she cannot be close to me, but yet she compels. There's a certain distance that she always must maintain. If it were true, if we were to operate under the interpretation that she represented or was the real well of the psyche, where it all comes from, as it were. To be too close might mean to fall in and drown. So I would say the sort of feeling that I got from the words that you just spoke resonated pretty closely with those interpretations. Yeah.
I'm feeling that because, the moon, the Luna, the female,
Mm,
and in Pisces, the watery roams. You can
mm,
drown in it, you can fall in love, but
yeah.
but you can never like hug it. You can't hug water. It's gonna slip away from you,
Mm.
right?
Ah.
It's not gonna stay. It has to flow, and it's flowing through you,
Mm.
constantly. Um, but that's what it does, and yeah, I get a sense of that. I'm not sure the whole thing is
Okay.
it's
Uh,
ineffable, right? But
okay. Then tell me
something,
this.
yeah,
I mean, I rarely have an astrologer right
yeah.
in front
Okay,
of
go
me.
ahead.
So, not that I keep track of these things very often, but some of my best friends, well, including my wife, and some of the most challenging people that I've been around have been Scorpios. Is there a reason that so many Scorpios are in my life and they're being like this?
Oh man. So first of all, we don't divide up into 12 and talk about stereotypes, right? Because I'm
Fair
not
enough.
right, because I'm not just talking to you as a Gemini. That would be very one-sided and one-dimensional, and we could make it like a dating disadvantage or whatever. Eh, Very stereotypical. But that being said, of course, there is a lot to one sun sign, and Scorpios, they're here for the real thing. So they're gonna want to go deep, and if you want to stay, just just
Mm,
having fun, a little bit
mm,
surface talk, then maybe that's an energy for you that's challenging, because
mm,
they expect more of life in general.
mm,
They want more. And
mm.
so, but I guess for you, if talking in terms of your chart, so did you say your wife is a Scorpio?
Yes,
Yeah. Do you have kids together, or?
we don't.
Okay. Well, you have
By
a home.
choice, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. But you have a
Yeah.
home together, right?
Yes, yes, we
Yeah.
do.
So because Scorpio is your fourth house, and that's how we can always see how people is a match to us, is where do their placements fall into our placements. And the fourth house
Mm,
is about home and family, and
mm,
our deepest roots, really. So in that way, we could play with the idea that when you meet a Scorpio, it's gonna pull up some really deep stuff for you, but it's also gonna be a really good companion in terms of making a home and family with.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, my wife's going to love hearing that.
Yeah. Right. Right. And I think it's really nourishing for you, isn't it? Because
Mm,
you know so much, and this is an area where maybe you could you also have something to learn, and
mm.
I think it's really nourishing to your soul in that way, don't you think? For her
I think
Scorpio
so.
energy.
Well, yes, I would have to, speaking from more than 10 years experience, the answer is yes.
Oh, been together for 10 years.
Oh, more than that.
Oh,
Married for 10 years, just, yeah,
oh,
as of recently.
wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. Ah, Craig, thank you so
Yes.
much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. Oh man, so much.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I really felt like we were talking about your chart the whole time. It was just really vibrant right there with me. Maybe because of your curiosity kind of opened up the field.
Mm.
So, yeah, really thank you. Is there anything in the end you feel like saying to the listeners, leaving us with?
Well, I just want to thank you for drawing attention to my projects. The one thing that I feel, some regret or remorse about right now is the fact that I don't have any of these decks available to those who might have become interested in them. Although I would just say, stay attached to my projects. Maybe you found me on Substack, right? I
I
can't
guess I
remember.
did. It's so long
Yeah.
ago. And then I started listening
Mm.
to your Left Hand podcast. So that's where
Okay.
I feel I know you from now. But I think you're right, actually. In the beginning, it might have been
Yeah.
Substack. Yeah. Yeah. Very
Because
fun.
I'll say this, most of my updates about decks and things like that will happen there. So folks can follow me under the blog. It's titled Split Infinities and my artist name's Sereptie. So yeah, just stay tuned there. I would say the earliest I could have decks is maybe April, March or April, more likely in the summertime. And yeah, I definitely invite folks to follow the Vintagia project, especially because you don't have to have a lot of knowledge about the I Ching just to get on board with some of the basic functions of the deck. And I think it's a lot of fun for artists and other creative type people. Yeah.
Wonderful. That sounds like us.
Yeah.
So, was it splitting infinities?
Oh,
Yeah.
split.
Split.
Split
Mm.
infinities. Yep.
And then Sereptie, then everything comes up with you, right?
Yep. That it should. Yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you.
Okay.
Be
Thank
well.
you.